Welcome to the Retirement Evolved podcast with certified financial fiduciary Adam Bruno.
This is the Retirement Evolved podcast with Adam and Lauren, Evolution Retirement Services, Evolution Wealth Management. We're so happy that you are listening and following and liking and what's that other thing? Subscribing. There's, Lauren, this is a whole different world with this podcast stuff. I mean, the radio, it's easy. You turn the station on, you listen, but now you got to go through your phone and find the purple button and then go to. So since you went through all that trouble to listen to us, we thank you. And we're looking forward to bringing you some real big pieces of knowledge today because we have a very special guest with us. He is Kevin Kyle, and he is a professional estate planning attorney. I don't know if I need to use the word professional, but he's definitely a very good estate planning attorney. Say hi, Kevin.
Good morning.
All right. See, he's already stepping in, and this is sometimes people go outside of their comfort zone with us. A podcast is not exactly something that attorneys normally focus on. So, and of course, Lauren's here with me.
Hello.
Lauren, I couldn't do this without you. I just want to know how much you're valued.
Thank you, Adam.
So what else we got going on, Lauren?
Oh, well, I figured we could just start with Kevin telling us a little bit about himself and a little background on him. Kevin, you want to take it away?
I'd be happy to do so. So my name is Kevin Kyle. I'm a board-certified wills, trust, and estates attorney and a board-certified tax attorney. I'm a Fort Myers native. I've been practicing estate planning law here in Lee County since 1997. And my firm, currently called Green, Schoenfeld Kyle, we focus on estate planning, tax planning, business law and business transactions, probate and trust administration, and Medicaid planning.
Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot. How much would you say, especially down here in Florida, how much would you say the focus is on estate planning and, in your opinion, what you've seen coming through your office? Has it become a bigger issue or has it kind of always been, the same?
I think it's always a big issue for everybody because unfortunately everybody has to pass. They don't have a shot or a pill for that yet. And statistically, everyone has a pretty significant chance as they get older of facing some type of disability crisis or mental crisis where they can't handle their own affairs. So everybody needs to plan for what happens if you can't make your own medical or financial decisions. And ultimately, what happens when you pass? How do you want your assets to pass to your heirs? And how do we do that in the most efficient manner, not only from a mechanical perspective, but from a tax perspective?
And it is a very emotionally charged conversation. And I notice with our families that it's one that they know they have to have, but it's not always one that's fun to have. So there's a little bit of procrastinating sometimes.
We've prepared a list of questions today to help our listeners, which are mostly retirees 50 and older, think through their estate planning needs. So I figured we could just jump right into that. What do you guys think?
Sounds good to me.
Great.
Can I go first?
You can.
All right. So something basic. Question 1. Do most retirees in South Florida have a comprehensive will in place that kind of reflects their current wishes? And, it's a two-parter. Why do you think that step is so often overlooked, Kevin?
Well, it's not fun to do. I mean, I hated doing my own. I'm sitting there at the computer. What if I have a stroke? Who's going to take care of me? What if I die? Who's going to get my assets? It's just not a fun process to do. I think statistically, they say only 20% of all Americans have some type of basic level of estate planning. I would say in Southwest Florida, given our communities, probably a little higher than that. Obviously,
right.
The demographics.
It's God's waiting room down here, right?
Correct. So I think most everybody has done a little more than the national average here. Now, that being said, everybody who doesn't have any type of estate plan, they have one. It's just done by the state of Florida for you. Now, whether you like that or not is another story. So everybody has something. It's just a matter of whether it's what you want. And is it efficient?
Yeah, and I think I say it all the time to our families and even at our workshops. If you haven't at least done your healthcare directives, you're in really bad shape, in my opinion, right? I mean, healthcare directives are so important and they lead to so many snags if they're not done. Has that been your experience?
I would agree. And I think more so even a power of attorney. The two basic documents everybody has. And when my kids turned 18, I brought them into the office and did these documents, a living will and healthcare surrogate designation. And that's going to do typically 3 things. Number one, it's going to say, who do you want to make your medical decisions for you, in what order if you can't? Because if you don't have that in writing, guess what? The state of Florida has picked who's going to do that for you and in what order.
Yeah, that's crazy. And Lauren, you had something, didn't you?
Yeah. Well, since we're going off of that, we were talking about, considering creating a living trust to avoid probate. And you were just saying that, unless you want the state of Florida to decide that for you.
Yeah, that's another thing, right? That's another thing Florida can decide.
Would you say creating a living trust to avoid probate is actually, I guess, the best thing to do?
It depends. It depends on a lot of different factors. You have to have everybody come in, because I think there's, going back to the living will question and coming back to the trust, you have to have something that says, here's who makes your medical decisions for you in what order. Number two, what do you want done if you're terminal, end stage, or comatose? Do you want them to do everything it takes to keep you going, or do you want the plug pulled, for lack of a better description? Who's going to be able to look at your medical information? And do you have any funeral instructions you want followed? Feeding off of that is, who do you want to pay your day-to-day bills if you can't? So for most people, who's going to be your power of attorney? Then when you die, how are your assets going to pass? And that's where a trust comes into play, because most people want to avoid probate. And probate is the judicial process where if you die, the judge determines who gets your assets. It's an expensive and time-consuming process. So most people, a trust can make sense to avoid that judicial process of transferring your assets.
Kind of goes right through probate, the trust, right? It's already like pre-stamped.
It's pre-stamped, so to speak. If you have this trust set up and have your assets in the trust or payable to the trust, your successor trustee takes over without a judge being involved. And then it just becomes a matter of paperwork and logistics to get your assets transferred. And it's much easier dealing with you all and your back office people to get assets transferred than a judge. A lot more cost effective as well.
And I think to your point, there are some, you brought up the power of attorney. Can you speak a little bit more to why that's important for financial matters? I know obviously we want to have that power of attorney in place for anything that pops up healthcare wise, but from a financial perspective, how important is that, and kind of why is it so important?
It's absolutely crucial, because here's the point. I'm married. My wife and I have been married 30 years. But if I have a stroke, just because we're married doesn't mean my wife can manage my 401k account, manage my IRA, manage my annuity. She can't necessarily get my mail or file a tax return for me. If I have a stroke and I don't have a power of attorney, technically speaking, to do a lot of little things, she has to go to the courthouse, have me declared legally incompetent, become what's called my guardian, and get legal authority from the judge to do all those little things for me.
And I assume that's not an easy process to do that.
It takes time and money,
right?
Number one. Number two, the problem I have with those is, a lot of cases people are clearly disabled. It's not an issue. It's when, and I've had this recently, wife calls me, husband has dementia, but it's not so clear cut that the judge might say, boom, he's disabled, when he clearly is, because a lot of times people in that gray zone can fool people.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a nightmare, because the judge has to appoint a lawyer for the husband. There's a hearing and a whole bunch of legal nonsense that has to go on before you can even become the guardian. So it takes a lot of time and money. And then the worst part is certain things, every time you want to, let's say, sell a piece of real property or make a significant expenditure, you have to get the judge's approval. And it takes time and money.
And speaking to that a little bit, I want to pop back to the trust in a second, because I've got some common concerns that families say they have when they say they don't need a trust. But moving back to this idea of, selection process, I know that with our families especially, sometimes there's this real issue with coming up with who is going to be the power of attorney, with who is going to take care of things when they're gone. With your experience, what advice do you normally give them? Obviously, you're not giving advice on the podcast, right? Like full disclosure, but just situationally, I'm sure you've run into people that have this issue of choosing who's going to do this, who's going to be the power of attorney, who's going to be the trustee. What is your normal advice? And give us some examples of when you've seen that.
Well, it's always a complicated decision, because there's a lot of family dynamics involved, particularly if you have more than one child. In the normal case, people pick their spouse.
Right.
I named my spouse as my power of attorney. We've been married 30 years. My wife also happens to be a lawyer, so she's got all the skill set to do it. My wife has the wisdom to do it. I think she's smart enough to say, here's what I know and here's what I don't know. So she'll get help from people like you for financial decisions, a CPA for tax issues. So I think for the first part, you have to pick somebody you trust, number one, and who either has the skill set or the wisdom to say, here's what I know and don't know, and go get the help when needed. I think the other thing too is you have to be able to pick someone who will say, if A is better for everyone else and B is better for me, they're willing to pick A.
Right. That's a tough one. I mean, I could see that. What do you do in a situation where maybe there's not family involved, or they don't have kids and they still want to get the estate planning done, but they don't have anybody in their own family that they feel like they can trust to do it? What happens in that situation?
Well, I think that kind of goes back to the next thing I would say too, is a lot of people don't have anyone, or they don't have kids who have the time. Their kids are doctors, lawyers, business people, and they don't have the time to do it. I remember one very successful son of a client of mine. He was the CEO of some big company, and mom didn't pick him because he just didn't have the time.
Right.
He was jetting around the world. So in those cases, people sometimes will look to friends, look outside the family. The problem with that is most people's friends are their age,
right,
or their maturity.
I've seen that too.
Would say,
yeah, I've seen that too.
What about a fiduciary or like some kind of guardian?
So, in other words, is there any services that are provided?
Yes, absolutely. There are. I call them professional fiduciaries, professional guardians. I tend to find that they are either retired CPAs, financial planners, attorneys who are kind of a service or an outlet for that type of work. There's some younger people who just do it for a living.
Okay.
I have one younger CPA. She didn't like working in the corporate world, and she serves as a professional fiduciary for people. Some of them are also licensed professional guardians. They're good choices. They're people that do it for a living. So there are choices out there. Sometimes, in rare instances, people's accountants or attorneys will do it.
That seems like a conflict of interest, though. That's why you said it's rare.
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily a conflict of interest so much that it's not what I do day to day.
Right.
I'm in meetings four
time
times.
Factor, just like you said.
It's time and expense. My rate's more expensive than a professional guardian. But the big thing for me is I'm not set up to do it day to day.
Right.
I go into 4 meetings a day. The market is up, down, all around. People have bills to pay. They need money, and it's hard for me to make.
Well, you really got into law instead of financial planning,
correct?
Right? So,
and touching on that professional guardianship, what does that really cover for people who don't really know about this? Is that like paying bills, checking your mail, like somebody who comes and checks on you?
It can be as much or as little as you want.
Okay.
Like a lot of people, like one couple I'm working with right now, they're perfectly competent. They just need somebody in there just in case.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I made an introduction to them. They met. They like each other. We're naming them the document. I imagine they'll have a phone call once or twice a year. Hey, how you doing? Anything I need to know about? And that'll be it until something happens. Some of my older clients, it could be as much as bill pay, taking to appointments, making sure the accountant gets the things for the taxes, helping keep their books organized. Sometimes it's just a meeting once a month. I hate to say it, for companionship.
Sure.
Yeah, and I have a heart for that here.
Me
I
too.
feel like we need to. It's an area that we've discussed multiple times because we've had multiple families, and we call them families, of course, but multiple clients that have asked us if we're able to step in when they pass away. And we always tell them, of course, we know your wishes and we can work with the family members. But from a legal capacity, we've never explored this option of meeting with the right families who are they know they're coming towards the end. They know that they have their finances, that they have to start thinking about what happens when they're gone. I personally think that as a team, we want to be able to do that, but it does come down to a time factor, right? So we'd have to be very selective of who we helped with that. But in my mind, it's not so much about representing somebody as it is about helping them through this, because I'm trying to put in every situation, I try and put myself in these families' shoes, right?
Sure.
And how does this work? And what does this look like? And anytime I'm in their shoes for this topic, there's a real fear factor for me. It's kind of like, wow, this is going to be a lot. And a lot of people say, well, I'm dead, so who cares? But the real people that care about it, they have this. And this brings me to my other question, and I get this so much. And I know that there's people out there that think this. In regards to a trust, the number one thing I hear all the time is, well, I don't have that much. I don't have any properties. I don't have that. I don't really need a trust. Is there a counterpoint to that where, you know, these people have in their mind that they have to have multiple properties or this big complex situation? Is there ever a time that you kind of advise people not to have a trust, or do you feel like a trust is not just about those things?
Everybody's different. You have to take a look at what do you own? Where do you own things? What is everything worth? What are the tax implications of what you own when you die? You know, right now, most people don't worry about the estate tax because the thresholds are so high.
Right.
You know, next year, and I'm sure we'll touch on this later, the exemptions change at the end of next year. Sometimes people own property in states that have a separate state estate or inheritance tax, so you have issues there. You have issues of, do I want to do probate in 2 states if you own a home, let's say here and in North Carolina? But it differs because, you know, if I have someone who comes in, I have 1 child, I have an IRA in my home and a bank account, they don't need a trust.
Correct.
Unless there's something wrong with the child.
The special needs
And
aspect of it.
you've been wanting to talk about this.
Or there's a spendthrift child or a child going through a divorce or credit problems. That's a different issue. But if I have Mrs. Jones come in and she has her house, an IRA, a bank account, and 1 child, probably doesn't need a trust.
And let's clarify the IRA issue about that, because that's a little bit more in our wheelhouse. The best way to leave an IRA, obviously, I think we can agree that on this, is to the beneficiary, because this is but if there is, you know, a special needs child or something that you want to, some way that you want to dictate how those funds are dispersed, that's where you start talking about the trust, right?
We start talking about trust where you're like, I want to leave my assets to somebody who needs help.
Right.
Or has legal issues, marital issues, creditor issues.
Or bloodline, they want to leave it in their bloodline.
Or bloodline. Right. Or there's generational tax planning, or maturity issues. That's when a trust starts to make sense, because you have it set up to A, avoid probate court, and B, a trust agreement is just a lot more flexible than putting a trust under a will.
Yeah, and you know, the question I have, and this is just some things that I've picked up, and I don't even know how important or not important they are. But when we talk about, you know, leaving an IRA inside a trust for whatever reason, there's some special circumstances. You know, they don't want to plop $2 million on the table in front of their kids and lock them in a room and see what happens. You know, they want, and obviously Susie's different than Johnny, so Johnny might need a little bit more time. You talked about maturity, right? So the idea of, and correct me if I'm wrong, if we actually leave the IRA in the trust, then a look-through provision becomes relevant there, because you don't want the trust to pay all the taxes all at once. You want them to be able to spread it over that 10-year period.
Yeah, the problem with the trust right now is 2 things. You're right. There's a 10-year payout period, maximum.
Right.
Number 2, a trust pays income tax at the highest rate at about $14,000 in income. So if we have IRA money come into the trust and it's in the trust at the end of the year, it's typically going to be taxed pretty heavily.
Right.
So most people, when they pay IRAs through a trust, they'll say, I want it to be a conduit trust. So I want the money, the required minimum distribution, to come in and go out in the same year. So the trust becomes more of a blocker to keep your kid from getting all the money in one lump sum,
right,
blowing it all on a Ferrari, a Porsche, and then being stuck with a big tax bill at the end of the year. So the trust in that sense is a conduit. It's more of a delaying over the 10 years than anything else.
And that's the spendthrift provision that you're talking about.
Well, it's not technically the spendthrift provision. That's the look-through or the conduit language. It says, I want my kids to get it over 10 years. I don't want them to get it in year 1, blow it all.
All right. Because, I was thinking, spendthrift as somebody who kind of blows through money.
Well, we're thinking 2 different things. I'm thinking spendthrift in the legal term. There's actually a provision in a trust that says, my son's creditors can't get it to trust.
Gotcha.
Spendthrift in the sense what you're talking about, is my son will go buy a Ferrari.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too.
I just figured, I'd clarify.
But when it's a spendthrift in your sense, it's like, okay, I don't want my kids to get it all in one lump sum and blow it. I want it spread out. And that's where a trust does work. Now, in the sense of IRAs, you can still do a stretch IRA over a lifetime, but it requires typically using a charitable remainder trust.
Right.
And to do that, you have to there's good tax advantages to it, but there are also limitations to it. that are not right for everybody.
Correct me if I'm wrong. That obviously the point of the charitable remainder trust is to go to a charity, but the kind of the different areas is the money, whatever's left in it, can still go to the charity.
The remainder goes to the charity.
Yeah.
So typically, when you pay an IRA to a charitable remainder trust, you're saying, trustee, collect this IRA, pay a percentage of the trust value every year to my son or daughter. Typically, you'll see someone say, hey, pay 5 to 7% to my son or daughter every year. And then when my son or daughter dies, what remains, the remainder from the charitable remainder unit trust, goes to the charities. And there's actuarial values you have to work in that it's likely the charity is going to get some money. So you have to have some charitable intent to that. And the other downside to some people is that the kids get that percentage every year and that's it. So if I'm just making a number up, if they blow their 50 grand from the trust that year, they can't go in and get another 10. They have to wait till next year.
Well, that makes sense because in order, the trade-off for getting all that benefit is there has to be some kind of, trade-off there, right? So it makes sense.
And, but if I could, the advantage is you take it, the IRA, the charitable remainder trust doesn't pay taxes, so the charitable remainder trust takes the $1 million, keeps it all invested. You only pay the taxes, the payments come out to the kids. So if you run the numbers, if your kids don't need the money, or even if they do and they're spendthrifts, a lot of times if kids live to life expectancy, it's a lot better deal in the end.
So the IRA is still growing inside of the trust.
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, what part of the charitable remainder? Oh, I know what it is. So there's supposed to be tax advantages to the charitable remainder trust, and I'm assuming that's based on taking the deduction now rather than later when they're dead. Is that how does that work?
Well, what happens is when you die, the charitable remainder trust doesn't pay taxes. So if there's $1 million in the IRA, the whole $1 million comes to you to invest, and the $1 million and the interest on that is only taxed as the payments come out to the child.
Oh, okay.
So you're not taking, in the case of a child, if you leave to me, I get $1 million, I pay the tax, I net $600,000, and I'm off to the races. The whole $1 million gets invested by you. It's tax deferred over a longer period of time.
I have another question, Kevin. How often should people review their estate plan and also the beneficiaries on the estate plan and their life insurance policies?
Well, that's a good question and that kind of relates back to people need a trust or not. Assets pass at death one of 4 different ways, typically speaking. A lot of assets like IRAs, annuities, life insurance, you name a beneficiary on them and they pass outside of probate.
That's the easiest way to do it for those types of policies. Yeah.
So you have to look at those every once in a while. And I'm a good example of that. I need to update mine. My kids, are now 24, 26. They're not 16, 18 anymore. So I need to look at those every once in a while to make sure they're good.
And I think, life events are going to change that too, right?
Well, my daughter's a good example. She's getting married next year, and I love
congrats.
my Thank you.
Congratulations.
Got to keep working.
Yeah, of course, because you have to pay for the wedding. Yeah.
But, it requires change. I love my son-in-law, but, you got to take a look at things. How's everything going to go and how's going to...
Well, you got to play the numbers, right? I mean, statistically, the marriage is against them. Hopefully they're that different. They make the difference. But, if we're being pragmatic about it, it is something that you should probably consider.
It's a life-changing event. Right. Kate, I hope you're not listening to this because I love you. Nothing
and we love your fiance, too. I love your fiance. Yes. We all love your fiance.
Well, that's Kate. So he's a good dude. But, so you got to look at your beneficiary designations. How are those going to pass? Should it be outright? Should it be in a trust? A lot of people have an estate plan merely by owning something jointly with somebody. My wife and I own almost everything jointly. I die, it's hers. She dies, it's mine. That's an estate plan. Does that make sense?
Right.
Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. People have a trust, things in a trust. There's pros to the trust. Avoid probate. You set up how you want your assets to go. And of course, if you don't have a beneficiary designation on something, and there's not a joint owner with rights of survivorship, and it's not in a trust or payable to trust, the 4th way your asset's going to pass is through the probate court under your will, if you have a will. Or if you don't have a will, the state of Florida has made one for you.
Talk to us about the costs associated with probate. I mean, on average, if you have to go through probate, I know that there's a cost. What does that look like? How do they break that down? How do they justify it?
Well, different firms do it different ways. And, probate, one of the reasons probate has a bad rap is it takes a lot of time, number one. And number two, it's expensive. In the old days, there's a statute that says a reasonable probate fee is anywhere from 1% to 3%. On bigger estates, that can be a big amount of money. And a lot of lawyers out there will say, "Oh, I have to charge you that percentage," which is actually not true. All fees are negotiable at a lawyer's office.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, well, that's helpful for our families.
So you just have to ask. It's like when I go buy tires, I kick the tires and go, how much are they going to cost?
How much are they going to be?
So you just have to ask. But, a lot of attorneys are, well, I have to charge the 3% fee, which frankly, in some cases is not enough.
Right, because there is a cost for that attorney's time and effort and work,
correct.
Right? So,
and in some cases, it's a big boon to the attorney. If I'm charging, for example, if there's one brokerage account and there's $3 million in it, and I'm clipping it for 1% to 3%,
that's
not a very hard probate.
Yeah. If
it's just one brokerage account. So it's a boon to the attorney. So a lot of attorneys will do them on an hourly basis, and some
what's your preferred method when you do
it depends.
Yeah.
And sometimes we'll do them fixed fee. So those are the 3 ways it's done. I just sit down and usually say, here's what it's going to cost. The typical run-of-the-mill probate anymore, you should probably expect a $5,000 to $10,000 bill.
Okay. And, it's similar in our industry because, we charge an ongoing fee for our services, which we feel the same way sometimes. Sometimes we feel like it's undervalued, but I also look at it like we're reinvesting in our families. We can't give them company stock. But we can do things like take care of the estate planning for them, take care of the taxes, and make sure that their fee is a lot more reasonable than what other people charge to do the same thing.
Yeah, for a higher level of service.
Right, a much higher level of service. But I think one of the big things for me is when we talk about these families that have kind of like that over $25 million net worth, it becomes very hard to say, okay, this fee is 1%. Obviously, that's a lot of money every year. What kind of service are we providing for that money? So a lot of times, back to your point, it is more beneficial to the families and to even us to just charge a flat yearly rate, right? And that makes sense for us. I don't know how much it makes sense in that world.
It really doesn't in our world. I just tell people, pay me when you need me.
Yeah.
Because, most people know when to call us.
Right.
And if someone calls me and they have a basic 2-minute question, I'm not going to bill them for a 2-minute question.
Sure.
That's
reasonable.
Or you're going to call me and you know when to call me too.
Right.
And you're probably going to call me, hey, I have this question from our common client. I'm probably not going to bill for it.
Yeah.
Unless it's like a $2 million question.
Right.
If you ask me something that puts my neck in the noose for a big liability potential,
then you're going to have to charge like 50 or 60 grand for that question. If it's $2 million.
But I think it's better to pay me when you need me because most people, I've had people, they've done their estate plan 20 years ago. I literally had this happen. I did her estate plan in 2007. The son just called me, only child, mom died. She never needed to update anything. So she knew she was
it just
set.
Depends on the situation.
Some people call me every year. Now, obviously, I think the more money you have, the more you're going to need us and use us and have
target
questions.
moves a lot. In other words.
The older you get, probably the more often you need to amend it. For me, I'll pick on me. Going from my kids' age 8 to 10 is probably not very different from 18 to 20. Now it's getting different that they're 24 and 26, and having different life stages.
And it feels like just yesterday they were 8 or 10, right?
Does.
I did.
Hard to believe.
The funny thing is with my older kids, Austin's 21 and Amelia's 19 now. That's a whole other story because her college is an extreme amount of money. We talk about this offline.
Yes, we do.
But
it's a new car out of the driveway every year.
It's a Mercedes out of the driveway
Yes.
every year. So what I'm thinking about is, when they were younger, the time just kind of flew by, right? You're working, you're trying to establish yourself. And I was raising them on my own. So that was a really hard situation. So what I've done now, and you'll probably do it with your grandkids, I started a little bit later and I have 2 younger kids now. So every second I get, I'm in on it because I know how fast it goes. But I guess it's very similar to someone who's 65, 70 years old now, and they turn around and they're like, how did this happen? It goes by so fast. So
yeah. Well, I think as you get older too, you realize your mortality more and you're more interested in looking at things, making sure things are set up right. Can I take care of myself? Do I need help? How did my kids turn out too? I tell people come in, they've got kids who are 2 and 4. I'm like, okay, let's not get too worried about it because we don't know if they're going to be the next president of the United States or sitting in Stark for armed robbery. You just don't know.
Yeah. And I think to your point, I think one of the most important forget everything else. Forget the fees, the costs, how much you save. I mean, how good is it going to feel? You know, you're on your deathbed and you know, hey, they're going to know exactly what to do. And how much easier is it going to make their life, right? Because we care about our kids. We care about our children, obviously. I say it all the time. I've never met anyone who loves the IRS more than the kids,
more than
right?
the kids, yeah.
You know, but the reality is we know it's going to be hard when we're gone anyway, especially if you're one of those family stewards that takes care of everyone, does everything. I know I'm very generous with my family and my friends, and I do that for a reason, right? I mean,
you're a giver.
They're the reason why I'm eventually in this chair. Mm-hmm. And I think the key to all of this is not necessarily the nuts and bolts, right? It's the overall picture of how we want things to end up. The problem is when you start talking about the nuts and bolts, it gets complex. And Kevin, you know, I love talking to you, but there are some attorneys out there that don't have that level of compassion. It's business only. They're in other words, they're not going to invest themselves into your specific situation because they're saying, okay, this is the way we do it. You know, you guys have to decide this. They're not going to ask them questions that will help them decide those things, right? And that makes all the difference to me. And that goes back to service, right? That's the important thing.
Well, I liken it to a menu. My job is to take your goals, what you want to achieve, say, here's how we can do it. And then you have to make the decision, do I want the chocolate or the vanilla or the strawberry? Because there's always different ways to do it. I will have people who come in and say, I just don't want a trust. I don't care for whatever reason. They don't want one. Well, guess what? I'm not going to tell you have to have one. I'm going to tell you the pros and the cons, and then you get to decide.
Right. I do the same thing here. We say it all the time. You don't hand us your money and say, okay, grow it by 8%. Like what does that actually mean? What is that going to do for you? We talk about providing the full service. We're just the team.
Here's where you are now.
Right.
Here's where you could go, you know, there's options. There's always different, like you said, there's chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry.
And we look at it now, we call it our Retirement Evolved Blueprint, you know, and obviously the letters all mean something different, but these are the areas that we've seen, we've experienced, and we say, okay, your estate planning, that's the first E, right? Taxes, you know, optimizing your tax plan, that's the O. So the idea here is you have all of the professionals in one place, and it has to be like-minded, sticky, cohesive relationships so that everybody's on the same page. And that's what's so important. These people need to understand that it's the telephone game eventually, right? Well, let me call my attorney. Let me call my CPA. Well, you call your CPA and your attorney, but they've done it that way for a while. So you feel like you need help. So you're going to go back and do the same things over and over again, right? That's the problem.
Well, I think it's a three-headed team, typically what I find. I liken to a football team. You guys are typically the quarterbacks because you got the playbook. I tell people the best thing you can do for your kids really is be organized. And a good financial plan where we know where everything's at, how it's titled, who the beneficiaries are, what everything's worth. That's gold to me because when they come in, it's much more efficient for me to say, hey, you need to do A, B, C, or D. Did you think about this? Makes your bill lower, number one. And two, I can help you better.
Yes. And the other thing about that is, even for our situation, we like to try whenever we can every year. And you know, it's crazy. It's busy, especially with RMDs at the end of the year, all this stuff. But we like to try as much as possible to meet those kids, to meet those people that are going to be receiving the wealth, because we want to be able to tell them, hey, this is what mom and dad did. This is how they did it. Obviously, you're in the captain's chair now, but you know, this is what they wanted, right? These were their requests. And we can't legally tell them that they have to do this unless, of course, they have a trust or something like that. But the reality is it's nice to know that we're all a family rather than just I'm the financial guy, you're the estate planning attorney, right?
Right. Well, I like it. Again, you're the quarterback. You hand me the ball, the financial plan. I play with it for a little while, or you throw it to me. Then it goes back in the huddle. You snap it because people are going to talk to you guys all the time. Because you got their money.
Right.
Me, they're typically only going to talk to, obviously, if there's a problem. But it's harder for me to fix problems when people are proactive. And you all know when to send them over to talk about, do we do the chocolate, the strawberry, the vanilla?
Right.
And they're going to probably talk to me every 2 to 3 years, maybe, unless there's a problem. We'll talk to you every month. And the third part of it is the CPA. They're going to talk to the CPA at least once a year.
Yeah.
So there's a good three-headed team, and if we're all
we love you, Ralph. We love you.
if we're all talking together and working together, it makes life a whole lot easier for everybody, and it makes everything cheaper and more efficient in the end too. And, it's funny with families, now that I've been doing this a long time, I've had some families now where I've had granddad, grandma, kids, and now I'm getting the grandkids in.
It's amazing how that works, isn't it? It's especially with the level of service you provide. The other thing I wanted to touch on really quick, this made me think about this, when we talk about the families and how important, and this is what the change is. We talked about the estate plan allowances and obviously we're going to jump from 12 million a person down to 6 million in 2026, right?
Right.
That's the plan anyway. That's what's been laid out. So, when you have these families that are going to be above that, these married couples that are going to be above that 12 million, depending on how far above that 12 million they are, what's your experience with ILETs? Like how important do you find that type of estate planning?
You're referring to irrevocable life insurance.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I tell people, look, once we get your first floor done, your basic wills, trusts, powers of attorney, living wills, what are you going to do to save estate taxes? There's really three things we have in our tool chest. One of them is life insurance. And life insurance in this context is typically second to die life insurance that pays at the death of the surviving spouse. Right. But life insurance is obviously received income tax free, but it's not necessarily estate tax free.
Right.
If I own a policy on my life and I can dictate who gets the death benefit, the IRS treats me as if I gave the death benefit to, in my case, my son and daughter.
Right.
However, when I buy that insurance, I have a trustee in an irrevocable trust, life insurance trust, commonly called an ILET by it. What happens is I never own that policy. I gift the premium every year to the trustee who buys the policy. The trustee, when I die, collects it income tax-free and estate tax-free because I never own the policy.
Because it was in the irrevocable trust.
In the irrevocable trust. So when we have clients buy new life insurance to help pay estate taxes, and that's one way to do it, people are paying a premium now to get a much larger amount later to help pay the estate tax.
Sure.
More of a financial numbers game. I'll leave to you all to explain to people.
Sure.
But what happens is, they collected income tax-free, estate tax-free, as opposed to if I owned it personally and left it to my kids, it may be subject to estate tax. So life insurance is one tool we use to help plan to pay the estate tax, coupled with charitable techniques. We talked about the charitable remainder unit trust earlier.
Sure.
And sometimes people just start making gifts while they're alive.
Yes.
Right now you can give anyone you want $18,000 a year tax free
per married person.
Per person.
So it's $36,000 total per couple. Yeah.
So my mom and dad could give me 36. If you're listening, mom.
Listen, mom and dad, it's never too late to start planning this stuff.
And by the way, it's 19 next year.
Is it 19?
I just saw the new numbers.
Okay.
You can also pay tuition directly to a school, and that's tax-free too, not reported by anyone. And that's a powerful tool. Talking about school earlier, I mean, I don't know where your child goes, but if they go
Ringling College of Art and Design.
So what your parents could give your child $18,000 each this year, and they could also pay Ringling her tuition as long as they pay Ringling directly.
Right.
And that's all non-reportable by anybody.
Right. Wow.
And a third thing, same for medical expenses. You can pay a child's medical expenses directly, and that doesn't count either.
And this is a good question. We get a lot of grandparents that say, I'm setting up a 529 plan for them. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, it's a different tool, but from what you're saying, kind of just gifting the kids the 36,000, well, it'll be different next year, but gifting the kids the 36,000 and then obviously paying the tuition directly to the school. It sounds like it has more of a tax benefit than necessarily doing. It kind of hits you both ways rather than just doing a 529. Am I right about that, or how does that work?
Well, I think it's just a different strategy. I mean, if you've got clients who just have money they don't need, giving it to the kids now or helping the kids out now just helps them with their financial planning. It kind of goes back to that generational wealth planning. And in that regard, it's not just necessarily estate taxes, even it's income taxes.
Sure.
Going back to IRAs, I've talked to several people recently about, okay, your tax rate right now is 15 to 20%. Your kids, when they inherit that IRA, they're in the prime of their careers paying, in some cases, federal, state, and local taxes of 50 to 60%.
Right.
So when they inherit that IRA, guess who's the big winner?
The IRS.
Yeah. So you got to look at it generationally. So my one client said, okay, we'll start taking more out of the IRA and paying more tax now just because it helps the family overall in the end.
And we're in a low tax environment at the moment.
Right. It's discounted.
Correct.
Discounted tax.
So you just have to look at all these things from a tax perspective, and if you have a broad view of it generationally, you can save the whole family a lot of money.
The other thing I wanted to jump on there, we went back to this estate planning aspect and trying to be as efficient as possible. We've got a lot of clients, families that have, properties in other state. Can you speak to that a minute? Does the property in that other state, say they set up the trust in Florida, right? Mm-hmm. Is that subject to Florida law now, or are they still responsible for whatever the estate planning law is in that state?
Well, real estate is taxed where it's at. So I'm trying to think of a state that has a state tax. Let's say Minnesota. Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Massachusetts.
So what'll happen is typically in those cases, we'll set up a Florida trust. We put the Florida home in it, obviously, to avoid probate. We'd have the Massachusetts home put in to avoid probate. But you still have the potential liability for Minnesota or Massachusetts estate, state estate or inheritance taxes, because the real estate's there. They gotcha.
Right.
So that's just one of those things in the overall playbook you have to look at and go, what's the best thing to do?
What about homesteading? Homesteading in Florida.
In what sense?
Like the Florida homestead exemption.
Well, here's a good example of that, right? Let's say that they homestead the property in the higher tax state. Let's say that it's beneficial. You run the numbers. Is it better to homestead here in Florida? Or is it better to homestead in the other state and remain that state's resident? It's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because if you remain that state's resident, then all of your money is subject to the taxes of that state. So I think what Lauren's saying is the homestead solution here is, you really have to look at this in the state of Florida. If we're homesteading in Florida, what benefit does that provide us versus homesteading in another state?
Right.
Well, the primary tax benefit is to save our homes, obviously. If you're a Florida resident and you homestead your home, they have the 3% cap on your valuation increase every year. So that's big. We've gone through runs here in Lee County where people couldn't move here fast enough because home prices on the beach or Sanibel were going straight up.
Yep.
So people couldn't get here fast enough or homestead fast enough. A lot of other states don't have that same type of benefit. They don't, because they have state income taxes, so they don't really impose as bad a property tax, or they just don't have a Save Our Homes or a massive benefit. So you just have to run the numbers to see what's best. The biggest question I get is, well, can my homestead be here and can my wife's be up north? Yeah, that's a little iffy to me.
It doesn't seem like that's the best idea to me, right?
I mean, I've had people do it and never heard back. They've probably gotten away with it, but
New York keeps really good track. For example, they'll track, your cell phone and your
cell phone and credit cards.
Yeah, they track it all. And if you're in somewhere else over 6 months, you're done. They cooked you, right?
Yep.
And the other thing is, when it comes to the estate planning law in different states, there's a lot of chatter now that a state like Nevada has, so you'll have people set up trusts in Nevada. So I was just thinking, what is the deal with that? Why are some states that people say, well, and you have attorneys here in Florida that are setting up the trust in that state?
Okay, so here's the issue with that. A lot of states are trying to be competitive on their local trusts and tax laws because obviously they want to attract money to that state.
Right.
So states like Nevada and Delaware, they will make their laws very favorable for trusts. For example, trusts can last forever, that we'll exempt them from taxes or something to that degree.
Sure.
We'll make them very hard for a creditor or ex-spouse to ever come attack. So what's called domestic asset protection trusts. So there are reasons to go to some of those states. I just find that for most people who are here, they're retired. They were never high-flying business people, lawyers, accountants. They did their business, worked hard, saved hard. They don't have any potential issues out there. So to go out to Nevada or Delaware and rack up a lot of costs doesn't make a whole lot of sense in most cases to me.
Does it make sense for like that family that's over 25 million maybe?
It might, because they're bigger targets,
right?
And sometimes people will go, I'm a doctor, lawyer, real estate developer. I want to have some money in another state that has better asset protection laws. So
that's a factor too.
That's the biggest reason I see people do it is some of those states have very good laws where you can set up a trust for yourself and have it exempt from your creditor claims, at least arguably.
Okay. Well, that's a big thing, right? So I guess this has been really helpful. You know, what I take away from this is why are you scared out there? You know, it's time to deal with it. Get it off your chest, get it off your plate. You know, come in and talk to us first, then go talk to Kevin, or go talk to Kevin first, then come talk to us. That's what I love about our relationship. So I think on the end here, go ahead, Kevin.
Well, we try to make it as painless as possible. And I think particularly for your clients, it's not going to be super painful because you're going to have a financial plan for them that probably gives me all the information and the tools that I need to get the job done efficiently and quickly.
Well, I always say we skip a little bit of a step because when you meet them for the first time, it's kind of outlined exactly what they want. So it gives you more time to just have more of a personal conversation with them, which is, I feel like that's helpful because it's like going to the doctor's office. They already have the blood work. They already have So, you know, the doctor can actually get to spend a little bit more time with you than tapping on his keyboard for 45 minutes and giving you 5 minutes of attention. Right. So I think that's important.
And frankly, when you all come to the meeting or join in the meeting, I like it because you have some insights that they may be too bashful to tell me about, or you may gently prod them to go, hey, you need to tell them about your daughter's pending divorce or your son's gambling addiction. I'm just thinking of examples I've had recently.
Yeah. No, that's you know, and you see it a lot. You know, this next generation, there's drugs, there's different things, there's different addictions than when we were growing up, right? So, you know, obviously there might be a Louis Vuitton addiction or a shopping addiction. Honey, I love you. I'm not talking about you. It's okay.
Oh
gaming
Kelly,
addiction.
You're an angel.
I know she is a saint, isn't she?
But yeah, this was great, guys. That for those of you listening, any questions, like Adam said, reach out to us, 239-771-8696. Feel free to reach out to Green, Schoenfeld, and Kyle. And don't forget.
What's your number over there, Kevin?
Yeah.
I should have it by heart.
Our number is 936-7200.
Yeah. So reach out. You know, this is not, we don't want this to be painful for you, but if you don't reach out, it could be quite painful, right? And we're not going to charge you to kind of understand where you're at and what you're doing. When we design a blueprint, we don't charge people for that, right, Lauren? I mean,
yes, they're
that's
complimentary.
It's complimentary. And the important thing, first and foremost, is seeing where you are and where you're going to end up. Right. I mean, and Kevin does a great job of telling you that. I do. The team here does a great job. Don't be bashful. Give us a call. Shoot us an email, info@evoretire.com.
Yep.
You know, and you can also follow us on
Facebook,
Twitter,
LinkedIn,
Instagram, all that stuff.
Go to our website. Go to taxfreefortmyers.com.
Is it Twitter anymore? Do we have a Twitter?
It's X.
It's X, right?
Yes. Yeah. Taxfreefortmyers.com to download Adam's book.
And you're a saint for doing all that
podcast.
social media stuff because I don't know how to.
Thank you, Adam.
Yes, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
So make sure you go to taxfreefortmyers.com. We've got events coming up. We don't have a lot of time to talk to them about them today, but they're on the Tax-Free Fort Myers website.
I'll be sending out emails as well. We got our Christmas party coming up. That'll be in January.
Broadway Palm.
We've got our Lunch and Learn coming up with Matt Stoll from First Trust. That'll be December 18th.
Can't wait for that. That's going to be good. Yeah.
It's going to be amazing. Till next time.
God bless you all. Stay safe. Just be kind to each other. It's a crazy world we live in right now, and it's only getting crazier. So,
yeah. And thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin. Yes. Any final words, Kevin? You want to say hi to your wife or?
I don't know where she is today, but
yeah.
Hello, honey.
And Cade, once again, this was not an attack on you.
That's right. We're happy to have you in the family, Cade. No, thank you for having me. And like I said, we'd be happy to talk to anyone about your estate planning needs. There's me, my partner. We got 4 other estate planning attorneys, and then we have 2 attorneys who focus on Medicare and Medicaid planning, which I know you're going to have another podcast recording at some point on that.
Or Lunch and Learn. We might want to do Lunch and Learn with that.
Yes.
But, you know, the thing about this is, guys, everybody over there is somebody that you can sit down and have a conversation with. And, you know, that's what I was looking at when we first met Kevin and the team over there for the first time. Yeah, you talk about the technicals and the numbers and all that stuff, and that's great, and the industry knowledge. But what I'm really looking at is, can I have a conversation with this person and understand exactly what they're saying? How's the communication? And everything over there is incredible. We're so happy that we met them and we get to partner with them. So again, until we see you next time, God bless you and peace out, everybody.
Bye.
Investment advisory services are offered through Evolution Wealth Management Incorporated, an investment advisor registered with the state of Florida. Registration does not imply any level of skill or training. Evolution Wealth Management's unique CRD number is 307644. You can obtain a copy of Evolution Wealth Management's firm brochure, Form ADV Part 2A, free of charge by visiting advisorinfo.sec.gov. Evolution Wealth Management offers investment advisory services only, where it is appropriately registered or exempt from registration, and only after clients have entered into an investment advisory agreement agreement confirming the terms of engagement and have been provided a copy of the firm's ADV Part 2A. Insurance services are provided by Evolution Retirement Services. Any guarantees mentioned are backed by the financial strength and claims paying ability of the issuing insurance company and may be subject to restrictions, limitations, or early withdrawal fees, which vary by the issuer. They do not refer in any way to securities or investment advisory products. You should consider the charges, risks, expense, and investment objectives carefully before entering a contract. This material has been prepared for informational purposes only and should not be construed as a solicitation to effect or attempt to effect either transactions in securities or the rendering of personalized investment advice. This material is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for tax, legal, accounting, or other financial advice. Evolution Wealth Management and Evolution Retirement Services do not provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. You should consult your own tax, legal, and accounting advisors before engaging in any transaction. Evolution Wealth Management and Evolution Retirement Services are affiliated entities.